I do want to assure Albertans that we're doing everything we can to protect people who are struggling with homelessness, women and children fleeing domestic violence, and those who need access to food and other necessities. We are incredibly fortunate that there are no confirmed cases in the shelter system of COVID-19, but we must continue our efforts to protect vulnerable people here in Alberta. Our government acted quickly to increase financial support for emergency social services, announcing $60 million to support homeless shelters, women's shelters, civil society organizations, charities, and not-for-profits. Of that, $30 million will be provided to charities, not-for-profits, and civil society organizations. To date, Community and Social Services has received more than 800 applications. Effective today at 6 p.m., we are suspending applications for this funding so that CSS can assess the urgent requests and begin to get the funding into the hands of those who can do the most good with it. The other $30 million of this funding has been distributed to homeless shelters and women's shelters throughout the province. Homeless shelter operators have activated 14 new shelter facilities to ensure shelter users who are well and not showing symptoms can practice physical distancing. Additional shelters are now operational in Edmonton, Calgary, Red Deer, Lethbridge, and Grand Prairie. We are working closely with municipalities, shelter operators, and local AHS officials to identify and begin to use hotels and motels as assisted isolation centers. We now have identified nearly 200 hotel rooms to shelter people who test positive for COVID-19, in addition to the 200 spaces at the Expo Centre in Edmonton. Most of these hotels are now operational and accepting clients. As always, housing is a top priority for helping at-risk individuals out of poverty, so we continue to focus our efforts on moving people out of the shelter system and into their own homes. Shelter operators and community-based organizations are leading this important work, and since this crisis began, more than 400 people have now found housing. This is a priority for our government, and we will continue to work closely with our partners to ensure we can make continued progress in this area. In the same way, we know children may be abused or neglected in this extremely stressful time, which we will speak about in a few moments. We know that during a crisis like this, there will be an increase in domestic violence. So we have provided grants totaling $5 million to women's emergency shelters, second stage shelters, elder abuse shelters, and family violence counseling and outreach programs across the province. Funding will be used to help families access hotel rooms for safe isolation, to pay for food, transportation, and other important needs. Shelters can also use this money to hire temporary staff to improve access to their services and ensure the supports they offer align with physical distancing requirements. Finally, we are focused on filling gaps that may not have existed before in terms of food security and nutrition for vulnerable children and families. That is why we are providing $5 million to support Alberta's food banks and other organizations across the province who focus on addressing food access so that kids do not go hungry. To date, 121 applications for food-related funding have been received. We are currently reviewing these applications and will make final decisions on this funding very soon. Overall, we are incredibly encouraged by the successes of our community partners in providing shelter, food, and necessary services to people in need during this COVID-19 pandemic. And we are incredibly grateful to everyone who has stepped up to care for others in these very uncertain times. In government, we will continue to be responsive to the diverse needs of Albertans in the coming months, and I certainly look forward to providing further updates on these efforts as they become available. I also want to speak a bit today about child abuse and neglect. As expected, with daycares, schools, and community centres being closed across the province, Children's Services has seen a significant drop in reports of child abuse and neglect. While the majority of concerns that are typically brought to the ministry's attention do not result in children coming into care, we do know that parents and families, especially vulnerable parents and families, are struggling right now, right across Alberta. This pandemic has intensified many of the factors that lead to child abuse, maltreatment, and neglect. Job uncertainty, loss of income, and social isolation will only aggravate situations where children already may be at risk. Minister LaGrange and I reached out to educators a few weeks ago and asked them to keep an eye out for children in potentially unsafe situations at home. But we continue to work with our nonprofit service providers and recognize that they're already doing some incredible and innovative work to reach out to these families. They're providing an excellent job in this area, but we also want to reach out and work together on new ways of finding and helping these children that we may not have previously been aware of. Please be extra vigilant in your neighborhoods and in your communities. We need your help to recognize where children may be at risk and where we need to reach out to help them. Be aware that children around you may be in difficult situations at home. A child in distress may complain of hunger, lack clean or proper clothing, show signs of anxiety or physical abuse or neglect. Please visit alberta.ca and search for other warning signs of child abuse, and be aware that if you believe a child is at risk, it is your legal obligation to report it. You can do that by calling with immediate concerns at the Child Abuse Hotline, which is 1-800-387-KIDS. That's 1-800-387-5437, or call 911. The hotline is open 24/7, 365 days a year.